Hi, I'm Kent. Let's continue our journey on making a slipcast handle mold. In the previous video, I went ahead and designed this prototype handle, and the idea is that we can turn a tumbler form into a mug. So I went and designed a bunch of different prototype molds that can be 3D printed, and even a couple different handle forms. And then using these molds, I made a bunch of plaster molds for slipcasting. Or at least I was trying to. So using those molds, I assembled them, mixed the plaster, poured in the plaster, and then demolded the plaster. And the demolding was the problem. My first several attempts had rather severe breakout of the plaster. I made several different design iterations, and basically as good as I could get were these here. And this one's probably the best. There's a little bit of chip out around the handle, some here, likewise here. I played around with draft angles, I redesigned the handle form. I was using my water and isopropyl alcohol trick to try and shrink the mold a little bit. And I even looked into plaster set times to make sure that I was waiting long enough so that the plaster was strong enough to demold. And I think we have kind of marginal results at best. So I know I want to go ahead and continue to iterate on my design. However, at the end of my testing, I wound up with these two molds here. These are the best two. And I wouldn't want to use these for actually slipcasting for my actual process. However, I think it would be good to go ahead and test a few handles to see if there are any other unknowns. I have a few questions still. How well do these faces mate together? 3D prints are often not perfectly flat, and so we will likely wind up with some flash, and I'm curious about how bad it is beyond the chip out that we have. I have some mold keys that hopefully will fit together. And these are symmetric, so I can use one 3D print twice to make both halves of the handle. So it will go together like this. So I'm worried about the gap that's left that isn't part of the chip out, that's just part of pouring the plaster and using the 3D print. I'm also curious if the sprue itself is big enough. Basically, do I have a large enough reservoir here so that I can slip cast the handle solid? And are there any other things I haven't encountered yet that I will want to try and fix in a revision of my mold design? So let's go ahead and try it out and see if there are any more surprises waiting for us. So I got some giant rubber bands, and basically we just need to band this together. There you go, something like that. I'm sure this is overkill, but for the first one, overkill is good. So I've got my slip here off to the side. I went ahead and mixed it up. Basically, I'm going to pour out some slip. We'll fill up the mold. And while we're at it, we'll go ahead and do a pot just in case this works out. We can try attaching it. So instead of trying to hit the little sprue with my spout here, I'm just going to put some in a little cup. There we go. That should be plenty. We'll go ahead and fill up our mold. All right, this can hang out while we're doing our real test. So I think I just want to pour the slip in. And the pressure is coming up, so that looks good. Let's go ahead and top off this side. All right, now we let the plaster absorb the water from the slip, and this will be cast solid. Unlike the pots where we just want a thin shell, this should actually be fully clay. No idea how long it's going to take. My normal molds take 25 or so minutes, so we'll go ahead and do that and see where we're at. I'm also going to keep an eye on the slip level to make sure it doesn't drop too much. So we'll check back in a little bit. Okay, it's 25 minutes later. I did not have to top this off at all, although I think I might want to make the sprue just a little bit bigger, since the level has dropped down close to where the handle is. All right, first let's go ahead and dump the pot out. It's looking good. Put it here on my drainage table. And we'll dump out the handle. There we go, not too much came out, although I don't think we're quite cast solid. I'll let this drain upside down as well. I'll let these sit for another half an hour or so, let the clay start to firm up a little bit more, and then we can attempt demolding. So we're not slip cast solid, Looks like we're close. Let's see if we're good enough. Let's do the easy one first. Let's get our pot out. There we go, great. But that wasn't surprising. Let's check out the handle. We have no slip leak out of the mold. That's a good sign. Of course, with those many rubber bands, I'd be surprised if it did. Let's trim this real quick. Make sure it doesn't get stuck on the edge here. There we go. It's not surprising, we got a fair bit of flash where we have all the chip out. So the idea is we can just cut off where the sprue is. There we go, those worked out well. And those just go back in the reclaim. Gently pull it out. So our flash on the outside is actually pretty good. Let's go ahead and clean up the inside here. Well, for such a rough mold, that actually looks pretty good. All right, let's see about attaching it. So these pots here have a seam from the 3D print. I think it'd be a good idea to attach it there. And we're going to want to cut a little bit of curvature onto the handle to match the curvature of the pot. Just like if you pulled a handle. There you go, something like that. I have my slip still. I think I'm just going to take a brush. Go ahead and slip this end. Attach it just like that. I think we'll put a little bit more around the outside just to be sure. There we go, slip all the way around, give it another good push. All right, and the seam on the outside I'm going to do once it gets closer to leather hard. And we can clean up the handle attachment then as well. There we go, cool. One handled mug. Well, after all the struggles with the plaster, and with as rough as this mold actually is, I'm very much shocked that it came out as well as it did. I'm going to let the handle mold dry out and we'll try it again on a different form. Small molds and warm temperatures means that we can slip cast again. I don't think we need both rubber bands. Let's just do one. Looks good. And this time around, I'm going to do this form here, which is this mold. I'm curious how the handle will look against this curved form in particular. Same thing, we'll pour it in. Oops, a little too much. All right, this time I think I'm going to let it sit for a little bit longer and see if it'll go solid. I might top it up as well, just to make sure that there's enough slip. And while we're waiting, here's our mug. It's looking good. Go ahead and smooth off the rim here. Sponge around our handle. And this outer seam line should be able to sponge away as well. There we go, looking pretty good. Let this continue to dry. All right, back when these are time to demold. I left this one an extra 5 minutes and it's filled in a little bit more. It may need yet more. I topped it up once. There we go, cleaned up the bit I spilled. And yeah, one rubber band was plenty. There we go, came out again. And again, at this point it looks pretty ugly with all the flash, but hopefully we can cut that off again. One sprue. Another. And then same thing, I want to cut out to match the curvature of the pot. I left a little bit extra of the sprue this time. There we go, something like that. Sponge off the inside while it's easy to get to. That's where the worst of the flash is as well. Same thing, we'll add some slip. If you want to, you can score these pieces. However, with slip casting, the arrangement of other particles is more or less random, I believe. So you shouldn't have problems with stress fractures per se, which happens between when you throw and the particles get oriented like that, and when you pull a handle, they basically wind up going 90 degrees. Here, since they're all random, hopefully it'll stick just fine. There we go. Stick it on. Try not to deform the pot. It's still really soft. Put on some extra slip. All right, same thing. I'll let this one firm up and then we'll clean it up a little bit more. And here's the first one we did. It's looking pretty good if I do say so myself. Great, we actually have a working handle mold. I was not expecting that. As I mentioned, I was expecting many more issues than that. It seems that the faces do mate together just fine. The keys and the 3D printed faces, yeah, are working just great. I think making the sprue a little bit taller would be helpful, so there's a slightly larger reservoir for the slip to go down into. Otherwise, I didn't have any problems with using this besides the obvious one where the edges are broken out. And even with those, a sponge and a knife, and it cleaned up pretty well. Sometimes clay is pretty amazing and what you can do with it. And of course, I have to practice actually slipcasting these and attaching to my pots. I've pulled some handles and attached them to pots. I haven't done slipcasting handles until just now. So next up is to see if I can actually revise this mold and get it to form properly. See if I can make a 3D printed part and pull it out of the plaster without actually shipping out the plaster. Once I figure that out, then we'll have working handle molds. And as a bonus, for those who made it all the way to the end, here are the two pots bone dry. Handles are looking pretty good. There are some minor defects, but those will likely go away once it's been glazed. If you're having problems with your handles breaking, one of the other tricks is to cover it with plastic or maybe cloth and let it dry very slowly. We had 3 different materials with different water content. We had the slipcast pot with the relatively thin wall, we had the solid cast handle, and then I had the liquid slip where I used to attach it. And when things dry unevenly, that's a really good recipe for creating cracks. By loosely covering it with plastic, I was able to get the water levels to homogenize. So that means it's more likely that the handles will stay affixed. And the same for this one. This one I was curious about the form, how the handle would play with the gentle curvature of the form. I thought about actually cutting it a little bit shorter so it tilted in, or even manipulating the handle a little bit. But those are tests I can do in the future once my mold is working better. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. Thanks.